Hello everyone. In the last video I was taking a swipe at the Invasion Day narrative and those who view Australia Day in a negative light. One of my regular viewers, Pat Mooney, left a comment that I thought was an interesting one, and one that I pledged to him that I wanted to answer in the form of a response video. The point of the response isn't to lambaste Pat for his views, but to put forward some of my own thoughts on why I maintain that the Invasion Day narrative isn't based in useful reasoning. I also pledged to Pat that I would launch my response from the premise of some level of acceptance that Australia is stolen land that was stolen from the Aboriginal people by British colonialism. So let's begin by reading Pat's comment. But Gary, it was Invasion Day. Australia is stolen land and Britain occupied it, as they did this to many lands. They also gave Palestine to the Zionists. Now, if you think Israel has the right to remove Palestinians, then the Aborigines also have that right. Do explain the difference. I normally agree with you, but not on this issue. Okay, well, let me address the middle of that comment first. Without getting too far into the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I can see some valid arguments from both sides, I tend to side a bit more with the Palestinians overall. Whilst the Palestinians may have kicked off this round of hostilities back in October, I tend to think that Israel's territorial expansion since the State of Israel was formed in 1948 is the root of the problem, at least from that time forward. Sure, one can argue the involvement of the British and Western powers during the first half of the 20th century, but the reality is that the hostility between Israelis and Arabs over the Holy Lands goes back hundreds of years, even millennia, well before the Western powers that came into play later even existed. In closing on that topic, and again with myself acknowledging that I'm no expert on the geopolitical history of the Middle East, I can't see any other solution other than the seemingly impossible premise that they somehow learn how to share the Holy Lands, live together and respect each other's religious beliefs. It's that last notion that I think makes a good segue into the idea that Australia is stolen land. It's only stolen land if your mindset is that of someone unwilling to share. Stolen means that you took what was mine. If you're willing to share, then it's not stolen, it's shared. But moreover, what is stolen land? Isn't every territorial conquest that ever took place throughout history an example of stolen land? Did Julius Caesar not steal land from the Gauls for Rome? When William the Conqueror crossed from France to take England in 1066, was he not stealing land? When Danelaw was established in East Anglia and Mercia in the 800s, wasn't that the Danes stealing land? Does stealing land only apply to human against human? When the Aborigines arrived in Australia, were they not stealing the land from the kangaroos and the wombats? Don't we hear constantly these days that human expansion is destroying, or for want of a better term, stealing, the native habitats of the plants and animals that live there? It seems to me that white guilt Australians are somewhat fixated on hating against the British for colonial expansion, yet willingly choose to completely ignore every other historical instance of one people stealing land from another people. I find it interesting that when Cook was charting the east coast of Australia, he noted that the Aborigines were almost impossible to communicate with when compared to the other Pacific Islanders he encountered on his voyages. And what I mean by that is that whilst other Pacific Islanders were open to the idea of trade, he noted that the Aborigines were simply not interested, and that, in his assessment, all they wanted was for these alien-looking visitors to leave. It makes me wonder if there's some inbuilt collective characteristic to the Aboriginal psyche that makes them resistant to any other race other than their own. On the subject of leaving though, and getting back to Pat's comment, if you think Israel has the right to remove Palestinians, then the Aborigines also have that right. Firstly, I'd want to point out that the operative word in that statement appears to be remove. In response, well, one, I never said or would ever say that Israel has the right to remove Palestinians, and thus I would not agree that Aborigines have the right to remove white people. But could I also not counter that suggestion with, if you think Aborigines have the right to remove white people, then did not the Nazis also have the right to remove Jews? I mean, how can a perceived right for any people to remove any other people be seen as a right in itself? I was born in Australia. Should I be removed from Australia because of my European heritage, even though I was born here and have lived my entire life here? One of my big problems with the Invasion Day narrative is that, as best as I can tell, it's incredibly racist. I mean, who are the real racists here? The predominantly white government of predominantly white Australia provides a never-ending plethora of benefits to Indigenous Australians not enjoyed by other races. Government forms all have the question, are you of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander heritage, so that their eligibility for assistance not afforded to whites can be validated. Along with colonisation came many benefits that Aborigines would not know were it not for the arrival of the white man. They get cheap housing, or for that matter, housing. They drive cars instead of walking. They sit in air conditioning rather than scorching heat. Modern education, modern medical care, hot showers, refrigerators, washing machines. They can shit in a toilet rather than somewhere over behind that rock. And the list goes on. What do we get in return? Pretend Aborigines like Lydia Thorpe declaring war and talk of treaties. A treaty is an agreement between different parties, usually those of separate sovereign states. The whole notion of an Aboriginal treaty with white Australia is predicated on the idea that they're not part of Australian society but view themselves as a separate entity. That's an antithesis to the idea of being united as one people, Australians one and all. Let's imagine for 1 minute that we give you what you want, that we all pack up and leave. The English go back to England. Of course, that means that the Palestinians go back to Palestine, the Kiwis go back to New Zealand, the Italians go back to Italy, and so on and so on. Of course, it's only fair that we take our skills and knowledge with us. After all, that's our culture and our heritage. You can create your own welfare system paid for by your own people. You can build your own infrastructure, your own hospitals, your own schools. You can implement your own laws and live by your own culture. After all, leftards in the ABC seem to think it's superior to ours anyway, so go for it. I mean, you're the oldest culture on Earth, right? The culture that was 30,000 years of Dreamtime old when I was young, but now 50 years later is 70,000 years old and then some, apparently. And what did you achieve in that supposed 70,000 plus years that you have no written record of to prove its existence over such a time span in any way? Well, you did go from banging the sticks together to rubbing the sticks together, so that's something, I guess. I mean, the rest of the world was already entering the Industrial Revolution when they discovered a people still living a Neolithic existence with no written language, no recorded history, not even the wheel. What I'm getting at with all this is that trying to wind back the hands of time to the pre-colonisation era isn't a thing that's ever going to happen. You still live in Australia, you weren't dispossessed. It's not your land anymore just to have to yourselves and everyone else can fuck off. You have to share it. You're not entitled to power over the rest of us just because you say so. You want power? Run for office, like the rest of us have to. It's the year 2024. The official position in Australia is, and has been for decades, Australia is a multicultural land for all peoples. The Aboriginal position is, Australia belongs to the Aborigine. So again, who's the racist here? Every fucking morning, the ABC News says, coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people. No, it fucking isn't. It's the land of the Australian people, of which the Gadigal people are a part thereof. Anyway, I propose that we change the name of Invasion Day to Bring Into Modernity Day. As I alluded to earlier, Invasion Day is a term that's only valid if you apply it to every territorial conquest that's ever been. But that's not what happens, is it? Here's an example of Invasion Day. The day Shaka Zulu wiped out the Ngwandri tribe. That's right. Choke on the truth, bitches.